I just want to give a heads up before this video begins that there will be major spoilers for both Undertale and Deltarune. So if you haven't finished either of those games, I strongly urge you to do so and then come back here once you're done. But if you're deciding to stick around anyways, proceed at your own risk. You have been warned. Before we properly dive in though, I just want to say that I know a lot of people that watch my stuff aren't actually subscribed to me, which I strongly urge you to do so, as I'm going to be releasing some awesome theory and analysis videos of Deltarune in the coming weeks that I know a lot of you are not going to want to miss. If you find this video interesting in any way at all, don't forget to leave a like, and of course comment below your guys' thoughts. Whether you agree, disagree with anything that I have to say, as I just like reading your guys' different opinions on stuff that I bring up. But without further ado, let's finally jump into this video. Hello everyone, my name is Ninja and today I want to start with a question that might sound simple on the surface, but trust me, it's more important than it seems. Did anyone else find the mantle minigames unlocked in Chapter 3 by earning S-Rank on Tenna's adventure boards a little too familiar? I'm not just talking about how the mantle minigame clearly takes cues from the original Legend of Zelda, though that much is obvious. How you start off unarmed, then find a sword tucked away in a cave, just like Link's first iconic weapon pickup. As you get stronger, you're suddenly able to cut through environmental obstacles like cacti and trees, echoing the way Zelda gates progression behind bombs or special items. You collect keys like the ice key and the shelter key, and each one opens a new area with a totally different layout, much like shifting from dungeon to dungeon in those early top-down Zelda games. And while all of that, the keys, the sword, the dungeon vibes, does draw me in, what really caught my attention was the way the game uses that Zelda-like appearance to its advantage. In classic Zelda, you don't really think twice about the enemies you're cutting down. They're just obstacles, pixels, hitboxes, ones and zeros. And in Undertale, this is a mindset that the game pushes back against. It challenges you to see game worlds more than symptoms to exploit, as it urges you to connect, to empathize, to care about the world and its characters. It's a dangerous mindset to see games and the characters within them as nothing more than data. It flattens storytelling, numbs empathy, and turns rich, emotional worlds into empty playgrounds. And what's wild is how the mantle minigame brings this whole idea to the surface again, luring you in with nostalgia, something familiar and safe, only to twist it like a knife when you realize you're playing by old rules in a series that's already warned you not to. This minigame is not just a throwback. It's a mirror, a reminder of what Undertale had taught us, that the people or monsters you meet in these stories matter. In many ways, the mantle minigame is a chilling reflection of Undertale's worst route. Not just aesthetically, but psychologically. In Undertale, pursuing the worst path means methodically eliminating every enemy in the underground. Random enemy encounters fade into the haunting message, but nobody came. And intimate NPC interactions become empty shells. It's a brutal exercise in depersonalization, as each kill strips away meaning until you're nothing more than a statistical machine. Yet Deltarune weaponizes this dual familiar nostalgia in a tight Zelda-like package. The mantle minigames, pixelated enemies, and dungeon formula lure you into a mindless slaughter, just like clicking through the hordes of foes in Undertale's worst path. Deltarune holds this discomfort up to the light. It's a mirror showing how quickly gameplay can turn monstrous when you don't look at what or who you're destroying. That tension between the automated nostalgia of Zelda and the emotional reckoning of Undertale is what makes the mantle minigame feel like a microcosm of Undertale's darkest path. It's a tightly packed reflection, same brutal mechanics, same emotional emptiness, condensed within a deceptively cute wrapper. Something that also really stood out to me is how the enemies in the mantle minigame don't even really attack you, not at first anyways. They just kind of exist, moving around, doing their own thing. It's only after you pick up the sword, after you gain the means to harm them, that they start fighting. They're enemies, technically, but their violence is not instinct. It's a response. You become the threat, and they're just trying to survive. Which to me hits really hard. In both the mantle minigame and Undertale, the monsters don't start off in survival mode. Their involvement in battles varies from monster to monster. In most cases, we can learn in Undertale that monsters use magic as a form of expression, as a method of greeting, which is of course harmful to humans. which can be learned in the library. We can bring a pretty safe assumption here, as monsters are stated to send each other bullet pattern birthday cards, which means they're clearly capable of using bullet patterns as a form of communication. If they use it for something as casual as birthday greetings, it's likely they use it for other forms of expression too, whether it's messages, warnings, or emotional cues. Something that's supported by enemies like the Sundar plane, who purposely get in your way and their check description ponders if they secretly like you. Some monsters, like the ones in Snowden, just bully you, while some other monsters see you as a potential threat, wary of your existence, but most are never in active fear of their lives. You get to choose how the battles play out, as you get the first turn. You can either play into their expectations of you and eradicate them, or resolve conflict by talking. However, this minigame doesn't just feel like Undertale's Darkest Path. It goes a step beyond that. It almost acknowledges it in a weird way, and I say that for one main reason. Do the enemies you're cutting down look familiar to any of you? That little flower firing orange projectiles. Doesn't it remind you of a certain best friend who once smiled at you with wide, empty eyes? Or how about that creature that resembles a goat that's wandering around near those same flowers? Tell me it doesn't tug at something deep, something broken. Tell me it doesn't give you a heartache. How about that fish enemy that lunges at you the second you cross its path? Can you hear it? The distant echo of spears clashing, the ringing sound of the spear of justice, pounding in your head like a memory you didn't know you still had. There's also those yellow lizards, the ones that linger near those same fish enemies, only to collapse and die the moment their companion falls. A striking parallel to certain neutral endings in Undertale, where Undyne perishes. It's implied in those endings that Alphys takes her life at the end of the game. And let me point out another thing. The golden variant of that goat creature I mentioned earlier. The one you can find standing near a bed of flowers. That imagery alone should feel familiar. It's almost too on the nose. The gold, the flowers. It's hard not to think of Asgore. In Undertale, he's got a strong yellow color scheme. Golden crown, golden beard. He's regal, yes, but also tragic. Someone surrounded by beauty, but yet burdened by violence. You get the point by now. The mantle minigame is very clearly meant to remind you of Undertale, specifically its Darkest Path. But here's something that really stood out to me. Despite all the callbacks, there's no enemy that resembles Sans or Papyrus, or even mirrors or parallels them in any way at all. Not even a basic skeleton type, which would have been the easiest nod in the world. And that's strange, right? Especially when you remember the whole minigame draws so much from Zelda, and Zelda is a series where skeleton enemies like the Stalfos are everywhere. They're practically iconic, so why leave them out? To me, this absence feels intentional. Almost like another subtle hint that Sans and Papyrus aren't really from the same world as the rest of the Undertale cast. As if the track, The Place Where It Rained, wasn't enough to convince you. I mean, it's a reworked version of It's Raining Somewhere Else, which famously played during a quiet, emotional moment with Sans at the Mettaton Resort. And guess what? The Place Where It Rained shows up right before the first mandatory Sans appearance in Deltarune, which obviously is not a coincidence. I'll probably break it down in a separate video if you guys want to see that, but for now I want to ask something else. Why connect to Undertale in this way? Why bring back the themes of the worst possible route? Why build a minigame where Kris gets stronger by brutally killing everything in their path? What are we supposed to take away from that? And it's not just Undertale that the game seems to reference, acknowledge, and call back to. It's also clearly echoing the Darkest Path within Deltarune itself, the weird route, the one where things get twisted, where Noelle is manipulated, the route that pulls the game into something colder, more hollow. It's very clear that this is how we were meant to discover the weird route originally, because as many of you may know, or not, Deltarune was not intended to release this way. Originally, Toby planned to release Deltarune as one full game. Chapter 1 was meant to be the demo, but then, well, a certain little pandemic hit, and the world went through a rough time. So as a gift during all of that uncertainty, he released Chapter 2 early, which later became part of the actual demo. But that decision changed everything, because it gave us time to sit with Chapter 2, to replay it, to poke at the edges of the system. And eventually, that's how people found the alternate route, the weird route. If the full game had dropped all at once, the chances are we never would have looked back. We would have finished Chapter 2 and moved on to Chapter 3. Maybe even stumbled into the mantle minigame, and only then learned about the weird route through the game's own text. But because of how things played out in real life, we discovered it early. We lived in Chapter 2 long enough to find the cracks. The text you can find during this segment supports this fact, that this is how we were meant to discover it, and is honestly how most new players probably will discover the weird route, since it's not being subtle at all, considering the fact that Chapter 2 literally allows you to take control of a person that can use ice magic and freeze enemies. Text that hints at this in Chapter 3 reads, "The forbidden path began with the ice magic." Not to mention, you can also find text that reads, "Follow the white cloak." A person in a white cloak is recruited into your party, who you then use to freeze enemies, and use the ice shells to complete puzzles. There's actually also a bird enemy that you can find in this ice dungeon, where you encounter this white cloak person. You can only progress if you kill them. This is a very obvious reference to Birdly, as if you want to stay on the weird route, the only way to progress the story is to freeze Birdly with snowgave, which puts him into a coma in Chapter 4. The person in the white cloak is very obviously meant to parallel that of Noelle. It's very interesting, isn't it, how the minigame doesn't just nod to Undertale and Deltarune's darkest routes. It actively draws from both. It pulls the worst instincts out of the player and Kris and just lets you stew in it. But it doesn't stop there, because someone wants this. Someone behind the curtain, watching it all unfold. Someone who revels in the violence. And that person is, of course, Eram. I want to discuss why I refer to the Shadow Mantle holder by the name of Eram. Eram's name is never mentioned once in the entirety of the game. However, the song, entitled simply Eram, plays when they are speaking directly to Kris, so we can assume that this is their name based on that. Just wanted to say that because I don't know how well known this fact is. Eram, all things considered, feels like the real secret boss of Chapter 3. I mean, think about it. You have to go out of your way just to even interact with Eram. They're completely missable. Meanwhile, the knight, whom many consider to be the actual secret boss of Chapter 3, you're going to run into them no matter what. Whether you survive or not is a different story. But that encounter is always guaranteed, as that's always how Chapter 3 ends. Eram, on the other hand, is hidden behind performance, behind the effort. You have to earn that S rank on Tenna's boards just to even get to the point to where you can actually trigger the fight. And what's wild is that they hold the Shadow Mantle, an item you need to realistically stand a chance against the Knight and get the Shadow Crystal for Chapter 3, which is resistant to dark and star attacks. They're part of the path. They're the shadow you faced before the storm. Now I want to get into something that I haven't seen many people talk about, and it's the fact that Eram, at least to me, feels like a very deliberate parallel to Flowey, and I've got a few reasons to back that up. The similarities aren't just surface level, they run deep, right down to their role in the story, how they interact with the player, and the way they both seem to represent a kind of detached, gleeful cruelty. Let me break it down. Eram has a few different lines of dialogue that appear in the cave next to spawn. These texts being became stronger, and having fun. We can assume this is Eram because in the cave you can enter in the place that's normally filled with bombs. You can actually get to see Eram flying away. On top of this, the final text you get in the first cave is black, blending in with the background, only readable if you walk behind it, exactly like the text in the room where Eram flies away in, strengthening the connection between these texts and Eram. Eram says became stronger after you've killed everything before cutting down the cacti and moving on to the next area in the first adventure board of this Shadow Mantle questline. And we'll say having fun once you've cleared out everything in that next area. As if he's obviously expecting Kris to enjoy what they're doing. They are encouraging them to get stronger, encouraging them and pushing them towards a path of violence, which creates a striking parallel to Flowey, as right at the start of Undertale, If you fall for Flowey's trick and take a bullet straight to the soul, he will remark how in this world, it's kill or be killed, implying that this is the only way to survive in this world, encouraging you to slaughter whatever stands in your way. At the end of one of Undertale's neutral endings, where you decide to kill him, he will say, "I knew you had it in you." There's another one where you kill someone after Flowey told you to try not to. So killing people is actually fine? Sure. I'm glad we agree on the value of a life. I've learned so much from you. Though, are you really going to keep doing things halfway? The amount of people you killed, it's honestly disappointing. You idiot. You really can't do anything right. Not only does this highlight his perspective on the people around him, it obviously highlights that he's disappointed you didn't commit all the way to the path that you were on if you were going to disobey what he told you to do. He's saying that not only can you not spare everyone, you also can't kill everyone either. This being a big hint towards the route where you do kill everyone. And showing his support of it, similar to Eram supporting and encouraging Kris to kill everything in their path. There's another neutral ending dialogue if you abort the worst path, where Flowey will say, "Why? Why? We were on our way to real victory, on our way to making up for last time. Why do you have to screw it up? Haha, is this revenge?" No, I know what you're doing. You just want to see what it's all like, before we tear it away from them. Haha. Well, I'll let you mess around. I know you'll come back eventually, and when that time comes, I'll be waiting for you. This being yet another line to support him being disappointed in us aborting the path. During his monologue, near the end of that path, he will say, "It all started because I was curious. Curious what would happen if I killed them. I don't like this, I told myself. I'm just doing this because I have to know what happens." Ha ha ha, what an excuse. You, of all people, must know how liberating it is to act this way. He's relating to the player here, who have done these same horrible actions. He very clearly takes some level of pride and joy in the atrocities he's committed. Flowey even compliments us on how disgusting we are after you do a run where you kill Toriel. You just can't get enough, can you? How many times will you kill her? You disgusting animal. You didn't even try to spare her. Wow, you really can't get enough. You kind of remind me of myself. Wow, you're utterly repulsive. Not to mention, Flowey even does the puzzles for you during the worst path, allowing you to continue your mindless slaughter. He's very obviously entertained. I want to bring up another point that may mean nothing, but I found it interesting. During Eram's fight, Device Friend appears. If you are unaware of what that is, in Quinn's mansion, for a brief moment as you are walking towards the teacup rite of death, you can see a face with an eerie smile, with pink and yellow eyes. In the files, it's referred to as Device Friend. Flowey's theme is, of course, entitled Your Best Friend. A part of Flowey's color scheme was also, of course, yellow. Another connection that I want to draw between Flowey and Eram is the fact that they are the first people you interact with when entering Undertale and the Mantle game. This is a point I wasn't sure on including, but I might as well. Obviously, Flowey greets you as you enter the world of Undertale, and pretends to be your tutorial guide, while Eram is a little bit different. Like, technically, you can interact with them first, as there's of course a cave that you can enter at spawn on the first board of this whole minigame, where Eram says become stronger. But it's optional. You don't really have to engage with them at all until you reach the end of the second board. So I was 50-50 on putting it here, but I figured I might as well, as this does segue perfectly into my next point. While Flowey is the first character you meet in Undertale, who appears to you again before you leave the ruins, for the most part, he kind of just exists in the background and doesn't show up again until you make it to the end of the game. Compare that to Eram, who is in a similar position, appearing in the background throughout board 1 until you were finally able to interact with them at the end of the second board, but even then, you don't even get to see their face until you make it to the end of the third board. Another comparison that I want to draw between Flowey and Eram is a relationship to fire magic. Fire magic is Eram's main source of attacking you, through shooting fireballs at you, spawning and rotating firebars, as well as diving down from the ceiling engulfed in flames. While Flowey, first of all, is obviously the son of Asgore and Toriel, two prominent users of fire magic within the series. But if that was the only connection, I wouldn't bring it up. Flowey uses flamethrowers as a method of attacking you during his Omega Flowey boss fight. While during the boss fight you have with him as Azrael, he shoots basic fireballs at you, which are the same ones that you might find in Torio and Asgore's boss fights respectively. Now if we look back at Eram, once they're defeated, they'll have this line of dialogue. There, that's what I wanted to see. Flickering red, like pretty little flames. Your eyes can't hide it, Kris. Without play, the knife grows dull. Ha ha ha. Well, enough of that. We both have work to do. So if you want this mantle, hurry up and take it. If you can reach it. It appears to me that what Eram was doing was antagonizing Kris, so that they will give in to their most violent urges and enjoys what they did. They even tried to get Kris to admit that they like giving in to their violent tendencies, which we can see through this line of dialogue before the fight with the Eram. Kris, oh Kris, is it fun, Kris? Playing around like this? That's why you're searching for them, aren't you? The shadow crystals and the shadow mantle that I'm holding. Do you honestly think it'll get you what you want? No, part of you is just enjoying this, isn't it? The same part of you that enjoyed yesterday, knowing you could say it wasn't really you. Oh, don't make that sour face. I can see in the dark, you know. The question is, can you? Now, I don't think this line would be in the game if there wasn't some truth to it. Now, I'm not saying that Kris is this evil person that wants to bring the death of the goddamn universe. I've mentioned in countless videos in the past why this isn't the case. Something that I did not bring up in any of those videos is how Kris attempts to do damage control following the weird route. Taking Berdly to the hospital, apologizing to Noelle for being weird the other day. Noelle even says this when you advance the weird route. That's not the thorn ring, is it, Kris? Come on, you still. What about last night? What about didn't you want to protect me? Obviously, highlighting that Kris also has a very protective side to them. Kris is not a bad person, contrary to what other people might have you believe. They just do some questionable things, and have these violent urges, these violent tendencies that they attempt to repress. In the first adventure board in Chapter 3, you can find a Pippin's that tells you there's a key that you can find under a cactus, and will tell Kris that sometimes you gotta push your loved ones away. So it's of my belief that Kris and Noelle didn't necessarily drift apart. Kris did everything in their power to push Noelle away. The Dreamers and Holidays obviously drifted apart following the disappearance of Des. Tenna alludes to this in his monologue before his fight. Wasn't that just so much fun to watch me? I was so happy. Then people stopped coming. Everyone disappeared, one by one. No one wanted to watch the TV anymore. No one wanted to play games anymore. I've been all alone. Rudy adds to this. Just in the meantime, I can't be there to protect her. Keep an eye out for her, okay? Kris, even if we've grown apart, we still love your family. After all, me and Asgore were college pals, right? Oh hey, now that Azrael's off to college, you think he's doing any crazy parties? Like me and your dad? And of course, during the conversation between Kris and Noelle in Cyber City in Chapter 2, Noelle gets nostalgic thinking about the past when her, Des, Azzy, and Kris used to go exploring, implying that it's been a long time since they've hung out. I mentioned in the past that I believe Kris feels responsible for what happened to Des, so much so that they feel obligated to uphold a promise they made to some mysterious caller. I go a lot more in depth in the video where I argue that Des is the most likely candidate for the night, so you can watch that by clicking the link in the top right hand corner if you're in any way interested. But it's possible and honestly likely that Kris was to blame for whatever happened to Des. Perhaps Kris and Des got into some argument down in the bunker and then it just escalated. They let their anger get the best of them. They let it consume them. And in the end, they lashed out. All of this occurring in the bunker, of course. Or shelter, or whatever you want to call it. Which would explain why Eram, the individual that tries their damnedest to get Kris to give in to their darkest desires, hides out in a game version of the shelter. A place where Kris did do that, and it cost them everything, as it led to their parents' divorce, as well as leading to a distance being placed between them and one of their closest friends. These sort of violent and not so great tendencies that Kris is implied to have actually strengthens the similarities that they already had to a certain someone named Chara. Chara has a big presence in the worst route possible. Chara actively aids the player, tracking kill counts, directing who to eliminate, and even commenting on targets like Papyrus, Forgettable, and Monster Kid, free XP. I bring this point up especially due to the fact that while Chara is referenced and important in the pacifist route, and we do get some backstory on who they are and who they were, they are a huge presence on the worst path imaginable, directing the player to fulfill these violent urges, something that occurs during the sword route with Kris as a parallel of that route from Undertale occurs. I feel like Eram obviously shares a lot of similarities towards Flowey. However, the similarities to Chara don't go unnoticed either. There's a lot of both of them within the character of Eram. I began this video analyzing the similarities to Flowey because I feel like the mindset between these two are more similar. Not to mention, the location of the shelter key is very clearly intended to emulate the room you find yourself in during Undertale. That's the precursor towards the Omega Flowey boss fight. I feel like because of this, Eram is very obviously meant to remind you of Flowey. How even the ending of the Mantle minigame sections ends with TV static. TV static was used in the cut between faces when Flowey has become Omega. Not to mention, when you make it to that point in Undertale, Flowey says this: "I owe you a huge thanks, but now with your help." While Eram says this: "Thanks for all your hard work, Kris." Not to mention, the shelter key shines in the darkness, resembling the save points of Deltarune. While in Undertale, the actual save point of that game also shines within the darkness. The two scenes parallel each other, so I fully believe that Eram and Flowey are meant to mirror each other, with a little bit of Chara mixed in there for good measure. Eram and Flowey share a chilling detachment masked behind amusement. Their violence isn't fueled by emotion, but by cold curiosity and control. Flowey, lacking a soul, loops timelines not out of chaos, but because he's numb to empathy, finding sameness dull and death entertaining. Eram mirrors this. He observes you mowing down enemies in the Mantle minigame, seems amused as you earn the Shadow Mantle, and it only engages you when you've stepped fully into Bloodlust. Violence to them is a game, an experiment to be observed, not an act demanding remorse. Now compare that to Chara. They're darker, driven by malice, regret, and consequence. Their actions stem from deeply personal motivations, selfishness, grief, and guilt, not just detached curiosity. Whereas Eram and Flowey react with clinical amusement, Chara acts with intent, intentionally destructive, reveling in the results. All three embody darkness, but Eram and Flowey are researchers in cruelty. Chara is the one who becomes cruelty. They are all very similar to each other, and all parallel each other nicely, I feel. During the True Lab sections of Undertale, you can find some tapes where you can read this. Now you're smiling for no reason. Hehe, what? Oh yeah, I remember. When we tried to make butterscotch pie for Dad, the recipe asked for cups of butter, but we accidentally put buttercups instead. Yeah, those flowers got him really sick. I felt so bad. We made Mom really upset. I should have laughed it off like you did. It's never made exactly clear if Chara did this on purpose, but considering the end of the pacifist route, Azrael describes Chara as not the best person, we can assume that they probably did do this on purpose. Whether that was just to have a laugh or whatever else. I bring this point up especially because Kris has been described to do something very similar. They did this to Bratty. If you interact with her during the hometown sections of Chapter 1, if you select the memory option, you will get this text. "Remember the time you wanted to hang out with us big kids?" I was like, "Yeah, of course. Just get us some burgers." Then like amazingly, you actually got them. So I told you to go back and get some french fries too. Then a dozen miniature cakes. They were so good. I ate like 6. Then I suddenly got so sick I had to go home. Now I could already hear someone arguing that this is a stretch. But consider this. Kris is known as a prankster around hometown. This is the same kid that put ketchup on their arm and told Noelle that it was blood. This is the same kid that told Noelle that Icy was real and eats kids. And this is the same kid that shook the cart of a Ferris wheel with Noelle inside it once it was at the very top. Not to mention, they don't even seem to like Bratty. Literally, one of the dialogue options that you have is just go away. You can argue the dialogue options don't mean much, but you can talk to Undyne in the first 2 chapters and mention something about Dark Worlds. Only for Kris to then, at the end of chapter 2, set up a situation so that Undyne would end up in a Dark World and allow the knight to capture her. So clearly, some of the dialogue options are indicative of what Kris wants. So I'm going to be honest here, Kris doing something like this does not feel out of character at all. I don't think they intended to just straight up murder Bratty, but I think they intended to hurt her for treating Kris like an errand person. The fact that Bratty got suddenly sick and it wasn't this gradual worsening makes me believe this even more. And of course, we can't forget the connection to knives both of these characters have. For Kris, it's obvious. They carry a knife around, they use it to create Dark Worlds. Basic, simple stuff. Like, you can't tell me the end of chapter 1 isn't meant to remind us about Chara at all. With the knife and those glowing red eyes, similar to what Frisk has after you do a pacifist run that follows the completion of the worst path possible, where you essentially sell the soul to Chara. That feels like the best way to describe it. Another point I want to add is that following the Mantle questline, Kris is described as sheath, which are tools that are used to secure and conceal swords, which is definitely a metaphor for Kris suppressing their violent urges. Something I find particularly interesting is the fact that Kris is named after a type of sword. The files refer to the Mantle questline as the sword route. Not sure what to do with this information, but I found it worth noting. There's an interaction that prompts Chara to ask where the knives are, and there's a weapon known as the true knife that is implied to belong to them, as it's found in what was their bedroom, and when you use it, you get the text "about time." I feel like it's kind of obvious that Kris and Chara are meant to parallel one another. There's some stuff I haven't even mentioned here, but I have mentioned in a previous video, which I will include now, as that isn't the best video, and I don't recommend people watch it. But that doesn't mean I'm ashamed of some of the points I made. In fact, I believe there's still a lot of good in that video, even if most of it is bad. So here we go. Not saying they are literally Chara in the Deltarune universe, but I feel like the similarities are there. They look alike, they both are obsessed with chocolate, and both love to pull pranks. But on top of all of that, Chara, above all else, despised humans. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Kris might too. Maybe not to the extent that Chara did, but I still think it's a possibility. Another similarity is the fact that, of course, Asriel and Chara were adoptive siblings, the same as Kris and Asriel. The next one is kind of loose, but I feel like I should mention it anyways. Kris and Chara are both conniving. For instance, in relation to Chara, first, they purposely poisoned themselves using buttercups, not by accident, but to engineer their own death. That way, Asriel could absorb their soul and gain enough power to cross the barrier with them. So Chara dies, soul absorbed. The next step, they cross the barrier together to the human world. The next step, they plan to massacre 6 more humans, gaining their souls before returning to the underground to break the barrier and free the monsters. But when that moment arrives, Asriel recoils. He doesn't want to kill humans. As a result, he resists Chara's influence, retreats and dies in the ruins on the bed of golden flowers after he was attacked by humans when they made it to the surface, because obviously Chara manipulated Asriel into going through with the plan, and that resulted in Asriel's death, of course. His soul dissolves into petals. What's key here is that Chara's actions weren't accidental or frivolous. This was a calculated, multi-step plot involving self-sacrifice, soul absorption, and invasion. And the emotional core, it fell apart when Asriel couldn't go through with the violence. That contrast, cold ambition versus emotional resistance, is central to everything that comes after. Flowey's rebirth, the narrative we experience in the game, and how Chara remains this haunting what could have been, while Kris has plans of their own, as I mentioned with the whole staging Undyne's capturing. But all this to highlight the similarities between Kris and Chara, how they both seem to have very destructive tendencies, as well as to highlight their calculated natures. And I feel like this is a point of the Mantle game, to highlight Kris's violent and destructive urges, through bringing back familiar elements from Undertale and referencing an event Kris can go through themselves. I saw a theory that it's possible that Eram is actually the headband that Kris used to wear as a kid that was lost at some point. Considering that they talk like they know Kris very well, not to mention that the door that involved the second and final use of the ice key is a door with the Deltarune symbol that has horns on both corners. And I actually tend to agree with this. I really love how the horns are intended to remind you of devil ones. I mean, if they were going to lose the damn thing anywhere, as Toriel said they did, it makes sense if it was in their own house. It's confirmed through dialogue with the Pippins that Kris has lost stuff in the couch before. There's actually another connection between Flowey and Eram if we assume that Eram is the horns Kris wore in their childhood. Those horns, in large part, were worn by Kris in order to fit in with their family. Toriel even says that Kris would ask when their horns would come in, implying this is something they struggled with and might continue to struggle with in the main story, feeling like nothing but an outsider. So if the horns represent Kris wanting to fit in with their family of goats, that would make Eram a manifestation of that. And of course, Azrael is a goat, and as we all know by now, Azrael becomes Flowey. This is a part of Kris that feels like a demon. Like the things you have to do to even make it to this boss fight is just disturbing. You have to abuse Noelle. What's crazy about that actually is that there's no real indication that they are on your side when you enter that room to get the person in the white cloak. You can even attack her as if making sure she's completely under your control through violence before moving on to make sure that they won't hurt you. Then in the third and final board, the board where you actually fight Eram, the only way to progress is to kill Susie and Rousey. You have to do so much damage, kill so many creatures just to make it to Eram's boss fight. They do everything in their power to get Kris mad, to get Kris angry, to get Kris to be violent, which would explain why they stole the Shadow Mantle in the first place, as they revel in the fact that they can easily make Kris angry. I don't necessarily think this is just Kris either. Eram makes a point to reference in the Weird Route that Kris could say that none of what happened in Chapter 2 was really them, implying they are completely aware of the player's existence, in addition to seemingly being aware of the worst path possible in Undertale somehow, and then using that knowledge to mess with Kris. I feel like this was mostly Eram messing with Kris, but we can't gloss over the reference to us, as I feel like what Eram was doing with Kris, they were also doing with us. Ram mentions that they know what Kris truly wants is freedom, and that there's a game backstage that can offer it. That game, of course, is Mantle, and what's so interesting to me is that the game Ram points to, the one that supposedly holds the key to freedom, just so happens to involve acting out the worst possible routes from both games. I talked about this a bit in my last video. I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't, but the gist is this. Deltarune sets itself up from the very beginning as a game about fate, about control. It straight up tells us that our choices don't matter, and then, like it's daring you, it wants to see if you'll challenge that. And we can by going down the weird route, by pushing against the script, the forbidden path as the game itself calls it. But it's worth asking, how much are we willing to hurt Kris and their friends just to feel like we have a choice? How much damage are we willing to do just to claw back a little bit of control? That's what Mantle brings to the surface. It doesn't just give you power, it makes you think about what you're doing, and it forces you to ask, is this freedom or just a prettier kind of cage? It's still bizarre to me that this is the first direct nod to Undertale in this game. Like, I know there was a lot of mentions to Mettaton during the Spamton secret boss quest line in Chapter 2, how the body Spamton took on was the embodiment of a Lightner's dream, which you're really only going to get if you've played Undertale. But this feels a lot more direct. It's far closer to a direct acknowledgement as you are emulating what you do in Undertale's worst path, roaming around the world, going out of your way to kill these creatures, all the while gaining LV and getting stronger, just like in Undertale. Whereas I feel like everything to do with the Neo body was more of a nod than anything else, really. But like I said, I don't really know how much either of these things matter to you, or really any of the things that I've pointed out in this video if you haven't played Undertale. It starts to make a lot more sense why Toby was so hell-bent on making sure people played Undertale before Deltarune, as there's a lot more connections than people might have originally expected. Mantle's connections to Undertale specifically is what I wanted to bring to light in today's video, as I haven't seen many people talk about it. I'm not saying I'm the first one to come to this conclusion, just wanted to add to the conversation, I guess. I wanted to highlight Deltarune's deep connections to Undertale regardless, how Eram and Flowey are meant to parallel each other, and how Kris and Chara are meant to do the same. Chara does also share similarities with Knight, who is all but confirmed to be Des. Let's be real here. There's of course that red slash that is used constantly in Undertale and is involved in the first move that we see the knight perform on Tenna, of course. I feel like most people will recognize this flash from when you kill Sans, Flowey, and Asgore. Of course, Des has a few knives in her room. I mentioned in my previous video how Des is very much associated with violence even before she presumably became the knight. Both are connected to demons. The knight resembles that of a titan, a being formed from the fear of the dark, darkness being associated with hell in Deltarune, while Chara becomes a literal demon in death. In Undertale, Asriel is portrayed as a soft-spoken, gentle, and frankly submissive to Chara. The relationship, while close, carries an unspoken weight. Chara seemed to dominate emotionally, and Asriel followed their lead, even when that lead turned dark. Then we have Des, and while the connection between her and Chara might seem surface level, knives, creepy energy, and a love for chaos, everything deeper about her feels like a complete reversal. While Chara manipulated and coerced, Des seemed to support and uplift. From the little we know, she had a strong sense of identity, seemed well adjusted, and likely gave Asriel the kind of emotionally stable friendship he needed. So while Des and Chara shares thematic markers, symbolism, violence, the knife, what really matters is how they affect Asriel. Chara pulled him into something toxic, possessive, and destructive. Des, on the other hand, appears to have offered something genuine, even healing. Their impact on him can be more different. Not to mention, Susie and Rouse get swooned, knocking them down to negative 999. Interesting number. I wonder where I've seen it before. My theory for why Des and Kris both seem to share a lot in common with Chara is simple. Assuming Des is the knight, Des in her current state is an example of what Kris could be and what they fear of becoming if they were to ever fully succumb to their violent urges. Kris is someone that is fighting against their true nature, their deepest desires, their darkest urges. Someone that wants to be good despite the universe pulling them down to the deepest pits of hell. While Des is someone who gave into that darkness, who gave into their true nature and let it swallow her up to the point that there might not be anything left of the real Des anymore. You remember that enemy that mirrors Kris's movements in the final dungeon before you face off against Eram? The placeholder for that enemy is that of a black deer, while the placeholder for the white mage is that of a normal deer. Seems pretty cut and dry what this is meant to represent. This entity is meant to represent the knight, of course. The entity also mirrors Kris. Now I know in that moment the mirroring is literal, but I feel like it's also metaphorical. If Kris is fighting against their darkest urges, it's an eternal struggle, an eternal battle that is going on within them, then it makes sense for one of the main antagonists of the story to be a manifestation of that conflict brewing that they have to overcome. And that's what the Roaring Knight / Des represents. It's a manifestation of what Kris is actively fighting against, of what they could become if they just succumb to the darkness, but they won't. They might be forced into helping the knight for now, but Kris will never fully become what they are. They wouldn't allow it. They're stronger than they possibly know, and they don't need to slaughter enemies or cut people down to prove it. It's funny how we started talking about the similarities between Flowey and Eram, and then we threw the knight into the mix. What I find funny about that is that the songs Burn in Despair, which plays during phase 2 of Asriel's fight, Burning Eyes, which is simply the battle theme for Eram, and of course Black Knife, the glorious battle theme for the knight, all sound very, very, very similar to each other. Here, have a listen, why don't you? Building on the connections between these three tracks, it's worth noting that Burning Eyes actually contains the leitmotif from Power of Neo / Battle Against the True Hero. Power of Neo already showed up in Big Shot, and Spamton plays a major role in pushing forward the weird route, making his tie to this motif pretty direct. But here's the key thing. Both Power of Neo and Battle Against a True Hero are tracks that play during the No Mercy route in Undertale. First when Undyne makes her final stand, and the other when Mettaton confronts you in a desperate attempt to stop your rampage. And that matters, because not only are Spamton and Mettaton connected, as Spamton Neo's body is heavily implied to be created by Mettaton. Relating this motif to the No Mercy route, it's starting to feel like it symbolizes transformation through desperation or power gained in opposition. Undyne becomes Undyne the Undyne, Mettaton becomes Mettaton Neo, and Spamton becomes Spamton Neo. All three characters evolve into stronger, more iconic versions of themselves, right at the brink of death, or in the face of overwhelming force or desperation. Also, not to mention, Eram's name is an anagram of mare, the suffix to nightmare. And in the files, the song named Burning Eyes is named Nightmare Boss, seemingly as a reference to the song from Undertale called Your Best Nightmare, which is of course the boss name for Omega Flowey, which Eram seems to take a lot of cues from. Also, I want to point out the fact that this is another similarity between the two. It's minor, which is why I'm throwing this at the end. But Flowey and Eram also both laugh before their boss fights, so I just wanted to throw that in there. But to conclude this video, I want to point out a piece of text that you can find in the library of Undertale. And the crueler the intentions of our enemies, the more the attacks will hurt us. Therefore, if a being with a powerful soul struck with the desire to kill, put within this context, makes Kris struggle so much more worse, as they most likely feel like a constant threat to everyone around them, or a murder risk, if you will. And fun fact, Kris's name is actually an anagram of risk. Food for thought. Given that they seem to want to repair their relationship with Noelle following the events of the Weird Route, how they constantly risk their lives for their friends, it's so funny how people try to argue that Kris is a self-insert, even after the segment in the Holiday House where we fight against Kris. I feel like when you do that, when you try to argue that Kris is not their own person, and that they are stand-in for the player, you lose a lot. The game is not nearly as compelling as it is when you acknowledge that Kris is their own person with their own will and desires, and their struggles. Because you take a kid who's battling these demons within, who's being forced to help an antagonist they most likely had a hand in creating, which ultimately clashes with their protective nature, and side that they've shown throughout the game's 4 chapters. So yeah, that's all. I just wanted to emphasize how connected these games are. Point out some cool similarities and parallel to characters between games. Some I've seen people talk about, but some I haven't, and I wanted to give my own 2 cents. I'm not entirely sure how Eram seems to have knowledge of Undertale, to the point of being able to perfectly recreate the worst path possible. Like, that would mean they would have to have knowledge of the future, since it's all but confirmed that Sans is from Deltarune, which makes Deltarune a prequel. I guess the logical answer is Gaster. Gaster seems to be to blame for a lot of the weird stuff going on in the game. Well, you know, Undertale fans, if there's something you can't explain, then it must be Gaster. All jokes aside though, I want to try and actually explain why I believe Gaster and Eram are connected. I feel like the Mantle minigame is a metaphor for our connection to Deltarune's world, as the opening to the Mantle minigame and Deltarune share striking visual similarities, as both involve the soul appearing in the midst of darkness. To connect to the game, we're handed a pink and yellow controller. At the beginning of Deltarune, someone speaks to us, and based on everything we've seen, that voice is almost certainly Gaster. The background track, Another Hymn, contains his leitmotif. Speech patterns also match entry 17, and even aligns with how Gaster has spoken to us in all 3 official Twitter takeovers. Honestly, Gaster's fingerprints have been all over this from the start, even before Deltarune released, as the prophecy Rousey recites in the game was also on the official website before Deltarune was announced, written in the Wingdings, his signature font. When you first load into the game, the window is labeled Device Contact, and the mysterious voice asks if we're connecting, which is not a throwaway line, as it's the basis for how we, the player, are even interacting with the world in the first place. If anything in this universe has Device in its name, there's a high chance it ties back to Gaster, and that brings us back to Device Friend, the strange smiling face that appears during the Eram boss fight. At this point, it's not even a stretch. Gaster's shadow is bleeding through. If Eram is summoning Device Friend, then Eram is tangled up in whatever Gaster is orchestrating behind the scenes. I want to address something that I feel might be brought up in the comments. It mainly has to do with the relationship between Eram and Device Friend. as I have seen some people argue that the pair are actually working against each other rather than being on the same side. I assume this is because Device Friend drops healing items. I actually strongly disagree with this notion because it's not like Device Friend can't hurt you. It can and will kill you if given the opportunity. Same like Eram. I imagine the healing drops are more of a gameplay element more than anything else, as it probably isn't the best game design choice to have an entire boss fight where the option to heal is completely removed. I know there's something like this in the Gerson fight, however, while you are unable to use your healing items, you can rely on Susie's magic, which is good enough to get you through that fight. All the other enemies in the game do the same as Device Friend. All of these enemies clearly trying to kill you in order to preserve themselves and survive. So it makes sense there's something like this in the actual boss fight of this quest. All this to say, I'm not entirely sure how good of an argument the healing item thing is, because the enemies that are working against you do the same thing as Device Friend, which would imply this is the case for them as well. But that's just my opinion after all. There is other evidence to suggest that Device Friend isn't the friendliest of characters, which yeah, I know is pretty ironic. Let me know if you guys want to see a video on that, as I find the topic very interesting. There's a point related to the songs of the Sword route that I want to bring up. It's the fact that every single one of them, from Sword to Burning Eyes, are all written in full cap on the official Deltarune soundtrack, which lines up with the way Gaster himself speaks. I believe this could be another connection to that of Gaster. Another hymn is also named using this convention, and that theme, as we all know by now, contains Gaster's leitmotif, as well as involves Gaster speaking directly to us. As for why Eram and Gaster are so tied together, well, I believe Eram is the bridge between Gaster and Deltarune's world. We know from Sham that Devil went mad after meeting a strange someone, and this encounter likely led to the shadow crystal he now holds. Devil speaks cryptically, yes, but it's clear that he knows things he shouldn't, foreshadowing events of Chapter 2 before they even happen. Then there's Spamton. He also receives a shadow crystal. Spamton's Dealmaker glasses flash pink and yellow, the same colors as Device Friend. If you wear them during the Tenna boss fight, you can read Tenna's stats, which foreshadows his death at the hands of the knight. More evidence that Spamton too has seen the future. And Spamton isn't just reacting, he wants Kris's soul, one of the only characters so far to directly express that desire. Why? Maybe he was promised power by Eram. Maybe he was lied to. But it's not just Spamton that knows about the soul, Eram does too, as we explained earlier. And so does Gaster, of course, since he's our connections of the world. All this points to a deliberate through line, a single entity, connected to the shadow crystals, to Kris's soul, to future events, and to Gaster himself. If Device Contact is Gaster's method of reaching us, then Device Friend and Eram, and you could probably throw the Knight in here as well, are the ones embedded in the game itself, an agent of Gaster still pulling strings from within. That's just me hard speculating though. What do you guys think? I think Eram, on top of being a dark manifestation of the urges within Kris, is also a manifestation of their trauma, their fractured identity, or even their broken home life. Something very, very emotional. The knight, who shares similar features to the person we assume to be as Gaster, flees to the shelter. So we can just assume at this point that the shelter is where Gaster set up his base of operation, and where we will finally meet him. I definitely feel like the point between the connections to Flowey and Eram, and how Eram relates to Kris, is to highlight and to emphasize the fact that there's some little part of Kris that might enjoy giving in to the violence. By pulling from specific elements of Flowey's mindset and channeling them into Eram, the game crafts a distorted mirror of Kris, one that emphasizes this unsettling possibility. I'm not saying that they want to feel this way, and I'm obviously not trying to make the argument that Kris is evil. After all, I have a video where I argue in defense of Kris and why their partnership with the Knight seems more forced than you might originally realize. But what I am saying is that Kris is troubled, dealing with so many internal struggles and demons. They try so hard to be good. They want to be good, but there is something that festers beneath the surface. Something that they try to suppress. This unwavering darkness that threatens to consume their soul for good. But yeah, this is just my interpretation, just to clarify that. My thoughts are not the correct way to view the series. It's just my opinion based on evidence from the games. If you have a different opinion, I encourage you to share. I love viewing what other people think, or just correct me if I got anything wrong, which is always possible. I can get things wrong, so yeah. But if you enjoyed this video, agreed with anything I had to say, don't forget to like and subscribe for more hyperlink block. The support on these videos has been absolutely insane, and I cannot thank you guys enough. Actually hit 1,000 subscribers. That's insane to me. Didn't think that would ever be possible. So thank you to anyone that's interacted with my content in any way. It means a whole lot to me. So yeah, that's all from me. Take care, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Can I get a selfie with you, Mr. Frog?
Hey, no, hey, stop.